This guy's has the most popular. Paul is dead. Paul McCartney is dead in 1966, and the other videos by Rolling Stones, and of course, I'm not watching anything or listening to anything by Rolling Stones. No offense to Rolling Stones fans.
Today's episode is brought to you by Dashlane. The Paul is dead hoax is one of the strangest stories
And
in
I'm
rock
going to
history.
be
But most doesn't
pausing
seem
this
real.
and
Over
saying,
2 months in
well,
the fall
this
of
and blah blah blah.
1969, college students all across the United States were obsessed with
But that's
discovering
mostly
hidden
gonna be
messages
where
on
he's gonna
Beatles
be
album
saying,
covers
like,
and in the
okay,
songs
so this
themselves. At
means
the height of its
this
popularity, the
actually, so.
conspiracy theory spread around the world, spawning novelty songs, write-ups, and even prime-time TV news coverage. On today's episode of Strange and Unusual Tales, we're going to dive into the history of one of music's biggest urban legends and see if there's any truth to the rumor that Paul McCartney
It's
died
cute that you
in
came up with a whole
1966.
thumbnail photo for it.
Together, collectively, they thought Paul McCartney had died. I understand they still do.
McCartney was killed 3 years ago in an auto accident, and a double put in his place.
The gist of the theory is that after an argument during a Beatles recording session on November 9th, 1966, Paul McCartney sped off in his car only to be decapitated in an auto accident when he lost control of his vehicle. The UK
I'll
security
let him.
service MI5 advised the band to find a replacement, for they feared that if the news of Paul's death got out, mass hysteria would spread among Beatles fans, leading to civil unrest and possible mass suicide. The band held a Paul McCartney lookalike contest, and the winner was a Scottish orphan named William Shears Campbell, otherwise known as Billy Shears. After undergoing some minor plastic surgery, the Beatles taught him how to sing, act, and play music just like Paul. Luckily for Billy,
Alrighty, so let's actually look at this so far. Personally, I don't believe that, November 9th was the day. That was the day that Yoko Ono and John Lennon met at the Indigo Gallery. And so I can do my Yoko Ono, my, John Lennon voice, and I don't know how to do a Yoko Ono, nor do I want to. I could probably do a better John Lennon than that, but,
his job was made easier by the fact that the Beatles recently retired from touring and they were all set to don a new look for their upcoming album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It's unknown how this theory got started, but the earliest printed mention of the rumor was in the February 1967 issue of Beatles Book Monthly. It was a small one-paragraph article that dispelled a small rumor
I
that
think he talks about this in the video where he talks about St. Paul, which is for, like, it could be, I'll do a video where I look at it as a Paul McCartney is dead, song, and as it isn't a Paul McCartney, meaning if it's about the Beatles breaking up. It was in 1969, and the Beatles, well, John had already left, and George had already left, John Lennon and George Harrison, so it was going to happen. It was very evident, that the Beatles were going to, break up. And Paul McCartney, in, I believe, 1970, sued, both. I think that I think Paul McCartney sued, all the Beatles because, he just wanted to end the band. He wanted to end the Beatles. He wasn't keen on it. Like, who would want their job to end? Basically, it was like saying goodbye to a family member who you've worked with for so many years. Like, that was, for Paul McCartney, it was, I believe, 13 years. Or Billy Shears, which it was 4 years.
was killed
So it
in a
was
car
less,
accident on the 7th of January
important
1967.
to it.
This seemed to quell the rumor for some
Too.
time until the fall of 1969 when the rumor resurfaced. At first, it was just a story told at parties on college campuses across the U.S.
It was like in the Midwestern area around where Tim Waltz is. And they kind of were like, well, Paulie's dead, yeah, huh? I think it's because of St. Paul, because it was very popular there.
But then a caller phoned a popular Detroit radio station.
We're not going to be able to watch this whole thing.
Beatles music that contained hidden messages.
We're going to. Here's the first thing that I want
Stands for
to
the
show you.
11th month or November. Then we see the Roman numeral for 9. This represents the day Paul died, November 9th.
Yeah, I would say November 9th, he died. I think that's what it says. I could be wrong.
24-page booklet full of clues, including 4 instances of hands above Paul's head. The first being on page 14, then in cartoon
There's no proof that putting your hand above someone's head is proof of death. But it is proof of surrender, which this could be interpreted as surrendering Paul McCartney for another Beatle, for someone else. It says you was. Bad English, yes, but not so a death. Paul McCartney death clue. That one should have been more obvious. The drums, the shoes were reflecting off the drums. The drums were red. Just look right next to it. If it had been any further, sure, you can say that. But it's not. And the Abbey Road album, it just doesn't mean anything.
Paul is the only one wearing a black flower.
This one I believe.
Another symbol of death. Turning to the music towards the end of I Am the Wall.
This is what they said about that. This. They only had so many red flowers, so someone was going to get cut. But if you actually watch it, you can see that Paul McCartney, or Billy Shears, has a bouquet of red flowers. There you go. So, he could have just taken one of those and put it on him. Either A, someone had decided to make it red to symbolize death, or B, he didn't want it to be red, so yeah.
Buried deep in the cacophony, we can just barely hear voices reciting the death of Oswald from Shakespeare's
I couldn't hear it.
But even more brazen, when you play
I like I Am the Walrus.
You can hear the demonic chanting, Paul is dead, ha ha.
Take your money to the
I can hear Paul is, but I can't hear dead, and then I can hear haha.
While the White Album itself lacks
They say cranberry sauce.
Looking at the included poster, we find the only known photo of Billy Shears pre-plastic surgery. Moving on to the music.
I've actually provided many photos of Billy Shears before plastic surgery. I think I wanted to do a whole video, but something had gone wrong. Something had gone wrong. That's not it. Originally, this had the video of when he went to Kenya and took some photos, but so here's some photos of him before he got plastic surgery. That's him going to get plastic surgery. I think that's him maybe at the plastic surgery place. That's an example of what he looked like through the months. Someone doesn't go from looking like August 29th Paul McCartney to looking like September 13th Paul McCartney, and the same about September 13th to October 28th. But maybe I was wrong on the date that he had died, because it kind of looks, because the October version of Paul McCartney looks like the October 28th version. It's interesting. But the November 12th and onwards looks like Billy Shears. So I think he got plastic surgery somewhere around November 24th. Maybe even the next year. The year after he had become Paul McCartney, when Billy Shears took over and became Paul McCartney. Yeah, that newspaper.
The song Glass Onion contains a very obvious wink to the fans, as if John is confirming they're on to something. Well, here's another clue for you, Mom. The walrus was Paul. At the end of
As much as I love that song, that's not Paul McCartney. If you just watch it, that's not. Skizzer. It could be saying that at one point. Could be saying a bunch of stuff. And Glass Onion probably has more evidence than just. And here's a clue for you all. The walrus was Paul. There's probably way more evidence than just that.
I'm so tired, we hear some gibberish. But when we play this backwards, we hear John say, Paul is dead, man. Miss him, miss him, miss him. Finally,
I can barely hear it. I can hear it. I can hear him say that, but I can't hear fully him say it.
Turn me on, dead man.
This is the creepiest evidence. Okay, here's the deal, folks. Yes. Actually, that's probably the most, definitive, yes, that is evidence. He doesn't say, no, this isn't definitive evidence. He just says, I can't prove this wrong during this hand.
No clues other than yet another hand above Paul. Moving on to Abbey Road, the cover shows the
It's weird how they keep doing that.
to be a cemetery. John leads procession dressed in white, looking Christ-like.
When he's been dead since Pepper. That's funny. I wish I found a full interview, because that's just hey, Paul was dead and John Lennon said it. That was a cheap video. They do some people in the Paul McCartney is dead conspiracy theory just take clips willy-nilly. I'm never gonna say willy-nilly again. And they just say, well, here's the deal. Here's the clip. In the interview, he says Paul is dead, so blah blah blah. I think that's R.I.P. Paul McCartney, 1966. I think Justice, James Paul McCartney, does a pretty good job at finding his evidence and backing it. And I think he does. I think his videos are more than what other conspiracy theorists do, and more like a thesis statement than a clip, like saying, like, they just cite their evidence. They just say, oh, he said this. They don't say where they found it, and they don't say the full quote. But you see, with Justice James Paul McCartney, it's really hard to say his full name. He takes all of the stuff, grabs the evidence, tells us who these people are. Even in the most recent video, he tells us who Gregory Martin, I think that's his name. It's either Gregory Martin or Gregory Epstein. So he basically grabs this evidence, and even George Martin's son said that there was something off, something different with Paul McCartney in like 66, 67.
With his long hair. Ringo follows, dressed in black.
Yeah, he does
resembling
look
an
like
undertaker.
Christ.
Paul walks behind, out of step with the rest of the Beatles, and holding a cigarette in his right hand, contrary to the real Paul, who is left-handed.
Okay, this is understandable, like the drum thing. But people who smoke, they smoke in their opposite of dominant hand, basically their non-dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, you would just smoke in your left hand. If you were left-handed, you would smoke in your right hand. And I'll even look this up so I can prove it to you. Which hand do smokers use when they smoke? Whichever hand they oh, well, that's AI. Must be many. So yeah, I think that proves it pretty good. I didn't read all of it, so I could be wrong. They do that a lot, so... Paul McCartney, conspiracy theorist, by they. A lot of conspiracy theorists don't, seriously, like... I want to show you that was an interesting cover. Because you could say, oh, actually, why would they do that? Why would they want to do that cover? I can understand the recalled version, but why that cover? I think it's enough. I think that covers enough evidence to say they wanted to do it, and Capitol Records seemed to be okay with it. I think that's where it kind of went there.
Both clearly an indication of his horrific car accident. On the reissued cover, everything looks...
Yeah, I can understand why they would do that. Unless it's like something like Photoshop, but that didn't exist back then, so...
They were made and released while the real Paul was still alive.
But that's
what brings us to the rebuttals. While these clues are entirely...
I think this guy...
Some are quite convincing. There has to be a simpler
I think this guy's taking this completely off the Wikipedia page. Because I think there was a whole section of proof, and it was like in quotation marks, and then under it said rebuttals. So I think all of his evidence I think it's coming from multiple other articles, but I think his script, like how it's structured, is coming from Wikipedia.
Explanation. And so let's go back to Sgt. Pepper's. If we look at the outtake photos from the cover shoot, we can clearly
there
see
were a
how they
bunch
tried
of
many different poses. Paul
poses.
isn't always holding the clarinet. Sometimes it's a brass instrument. And notice how Paul
But they
moves
also
around the set.
decided
He's
that
not
they were
always in the
going
middle,
to go
nor
with
does he
that.
always stand.
But they also decided to go with the one with Paul McCartney having a black instrument. Why did they want to do that? Why did they say, okay, so these photos are great, but they're not as great as this one? Why did they say that?
Under the supposed death hand. For a number of shots, Ringo takes his place. As for the other appearances,
It's because Ringo Starr died in 1966. I'm just kidding. I have a bunch of conspiracy theories about the Beatles. One of them, I watched a video, it was a joke, that they made a joke of the Paul McCartney, it was like satire of it, was dead, where they said Ringo Starr was dead, and it was April Fool's Day, and yeah, it was a whole thing. So, yeah.
of hands above Paul's head, this is pure coincidence. Also, there's no evidence of hands above head signifying anything to do with death or the dead. The date on the
It
bass
does
drum
say,
head doesn't hold up when you
surrendering,
convert it to
so
the
maybe
UK
it's something
standard
like
format
that.
of day, month, then year.
It's
So it would
September
actually
11th,
read September 11th, which is a whole other can of worms. And while Paul didn't die on November 9th, it is an important date for John Lennon, as that's the day he met Yoko Ono at the Indica Gallery in London. As for the guitar made of flowers, according to photographer Peter Blake, that was an impromptu suggestion from one of the assistants during the shoot. The arrangement of flowers forming the word Paul is also a coincidence. And for Paul's OPD patch, when we look at alternate gatefold photos, we can clearly see that the patch actually stands for Ontario Provincial Police, or OPP. And again, the back cover photo was simply the favorite choice out of a series of photos.
Yeah, basically Paul McCartney, I think John Lennon was, sorry for choosing Yoko Ono over, Paul, so he wrote, yes, I
music,
did.
art, design, business, investing. Today's episode is brought to you by
We're gonna
Skillshare.
have to do this
When I
next
first
episode.
released my video